Have you ever been pushed so far that something inside you finally snaps? That moment when all the disrespect, all the belittlement, all the years of swallowing your pride suddenly crystallize into perfect clarity? My name is Morgan Reed, and for 7 years, I was the invisible engine that kept Archer Technologies running, while its CEO, Victor Klein, took all the credit. 7 years of watching him build his reputation on my ideas. 7 years of being treated like I was disposable. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Until the day he called me lazy garbage in front of the entire executive board, what Victor never knew, what he was too arrogant to even consider, was that I wasn't just an ordinary employee. I was the person who could bring his entire empire crashing down. And after that day, I finally decided it was time to show him exactly who he'd been underestimating all these years. This is the story of how I went from being Victor Klein's most undervalued asset to the person who fired him from his own company. The glass doors of Archer Technologies' headquarters reflected the golden hour sunlight as I pushed through them, balancing a stack of presentation folders in one arm and a carrier of coffee in the other. The Seattle skyline spread out behind the building, a view Victor never tired of showing off to potential investors. The kingdom I built, he'd call it, conveniently forgetting that 7 years ago, Archer Technologies was nothing but a failing startup on the verge of bankruptcy, a startup I had saved. "Morgan, where have you been?" Tina, Victor's executive assistant, rushed toward me with panic in her eyes. "The Westridge investors are already in the conference room, and Mr. Klein is looking for the quarterly projections. I have them right. Here," I said, shifting the weight of the folders. The presentation team was still finalizing them when I checked last night, so I came in early to make sure they were ready. Tina exhaled with relief, taking the coffee carrier from me. "You're a lifesaver, as usual. That's what they pay me for," I replied with a practiced smile, though we both knew they didn't pay me nearly enough for what I actually did. My official title was Director of Operations, but anyone who worked at Archer knew that I was the company's backbone. I wrote the proposals Victor presented. I developed the strategies he took credit for. I solved the problems he created with his impulsive decisions and explosive temper. For 7 years, I had been the shadow architect of Archer Technologies' success, transforming Victor's half-formed ideas into viable business strategies. Why did I stay? It wasn't just the stock options that had kept me tethered to Archer all these years. It was what the company could have been, should have been, what it would have been if my grandfather's vision had remained intact. But that was a story Victor had conveniently erased from the company history. In the official narrative that he presented to the world, Victor Klein was the sole genius behind Archer Technologies, the visionary founder who had built a tech empire through sheer force of will and brilliance. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, revealing a sleek corridor lined with awards and press coverage featuring Victor's smug face. I shifted the presentation folders in my arms, my fingers brushing against the USB drive in my blazer pocket, insurance I had been carefully cultivating for the past 3 years. "Morgan!" Victor's voice boomed down the hallway. He strode toward me, his 6'2" frame impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. At 45, Victor Klein projected the image of success. Silver threading through his dark hair at the temples, a perpetual tan from his frequent business trips to tropical locations, and a smile that appeared genuine unless you knew him. Well enough to see the calculation behind it. I had known him long enough to see right through him. "Where have you been?" he demanded, not waiting for an answer as he snatched the folders from my arms. "The Westridge team has been waiting for 15 minutes. Do you know how much money these people are worth? You can't keep them waiting like they're some ordinary clients." I was getting the finalized projections, I explained, keeping my voice level. The presentation team made some last-minute revisions based on, "I don't care." Victor cut me off, already flipping through the materials. Just tell me the bottom line. Are the numbers good? Yes, they're excellent. The new cloud security platform is projecting a 43% growth rate in the first year with fine. He waved a dismissive hand. Just make sure everything's set up properly in the conference room. And for God's sake, look more enthusiastic when you come in. These people are investing in our vision, not attending a funeral. I swallowed the retort. That rose to my lips. My vision. Not his. Never his. Of course, I said instead, following him toward the conference room where the Westridge Capital partners were waiting. These investors represented our biggest potential deal to date, $85 million in Series D funding, that would finally allow us to expand the security platform I had conceptualized 3 years ago. The platform Victor was about to present as his brainchild. The conference room fell silent as we entered. 4 men and 2 women in expensive suits turned toward us, their expressions a mixture of impatience and curiosity. These weren't just any investors. Westridge Capital was known for backing only the most promising tech innovations, and their portfolio included some of the biggest names in the industry. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay, Victor I announced, his voice shifting into the charismatic tone he reserved for people with money. But I believe what we're about to show you is worth the wait. He gestured for me to set up the presentation, and I moved to the computer, connecting it to the projector while he continued his well-rehearsed introduction. At Archer Technologies, we don't just follow industry trends, we create them, he declared, pacing the room with the confidence of someone who actually believed his own hype. Our new cloud security platform represents a fundamental shift in how companies will protect their most valuable data assets. I pulled up the presentation, the familiar sting of watching him take credit for my work settling in my chest. The platform had been my idea from the beginning, countless nights of research, development meetings I had led while Victor was entertaining clients on his yacht, solutions I had architected to problems our competitors hadn't even identified yet. But, in Victor's telling, it was all his visionary leadership. I took my seat at the far end of the table as Victor launched into the pitch, occasionally glancing at the notes I had prepared for him. The investors leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the concepts, my concepts, that he was outlining. The platform utilizes a proprietary algorithm that identifies potential security breaches before they occur, Victor explained, clicking through the slides I had designed. It's an approach that no one else in the industry has even conceived of. Except I had conceived of it. I had built the entire framework while Victor was busy buying his 3rd vacation home. The presentation continued smoothly until we reached the financial projections. Victor frowned, staring at a slide that showed implementation costs slightly higher than what he had apparently expected. "What is this?" he demanded, turning to me with narrowed eyes. "These numbers are different from what we discussed." The development team updated the implementation timeline, I explained, keeping my voice professional. With the additional security features, we're looking at a 3-month extension on the rollout, which affects the initial cost structure. Victor's jaw tightened. I recognized the look. It was the one that preceded his worst outbursts. "And you didn't think to mention this before we got in front of our investors?" he hissed, just loud enough for the room to hear. "I did mention it," I replied calmly. "It was in the briefing I sent you last week, and we discussed it during Monday's executive meeting." A meeting he had been 30 minutes late to because he'd been nursing a hangover from his weekend in Vegas. Victor's eyes flashed with rage. The conference room had gone uncomfortably quiet, the investors exchanging glances as the tension thickened. "Well, clearly your briefing wasn't clear enough," Victor snapped, his voice rising. "This is exactly the kind of sloppiness that holds us back, Morgan. We can't afford mistakes at this level." I felt heat rising to my face. It wasn't a mistake. The numbers are accurate and reflect the most current projections from our development and implementation teams. If you had read the enough, Victor slammed his hand on the table, causing everyone to jump. "This is completely unacceptable. We're sitting here with the most important investors in our company's history, and you're giving me outdated information? What do I even pay you for?" The room went deadly silent. I was acutely aware of the investors' uncomfortable expressions, of Tina frozen at the doorway where she'd been about to enter with refreshments, of the pounding of my heart in my ears. 7 years. 7 years of letting him take credit for my work. 7 years of watching him rewrite my grandfather's legacy. 7 years of swallowing my pride while he built his empire on the foundation I maintained. Something in me finally snapped. "The information isn't outdated, Victor," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "If you had bothered to read any of the reports I've sent you over the past 2 weeks, you would know that. But you were too busy on your yacht with the clients you're entertaining." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. Victor's face contorted with fury. "How dare you speak to me like that? After everything I've done for you?" I laughed. Actually laughed. And the sound seemed to stun everyone in the room, including myself. "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated, rising from my chair. "You mean taking credit for my work for 7 years? Erasing my grandfather's name from the company he founded? Building your reputation on ideas that weren't yours?" The investors were now watching with undisguised interest, like spectators at a tennis match. Victor's face had gone from red to white, his eyes darting between me and the potential $85 million sitting around the table. "Morgan," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "step outside. Now." But I was beyond caring. Years of resentment had broken through the dam of professional restraint I had built so carefully. "No, I don't think I will," I replied. "I think it's time the Westridge team heard the truth about Archer Technologies." Victor moved with surprising speed for a man his size, grabbing my arm and practically dragging me toward the door. "Excuse us for just a moment," he said to the investors. His salesman's smile stretched grotesquely across his face. Small, internal miscommunication. The moment the conference room door closed behind us, Victor's mask dropped completely. "Have you lost your mind?" he snarled, his fingers digging into my arm. "Do you have any idea what you just did there? Those people control our entire future." I wrenched my arm from his grip. "No, Victor. They control your future. The future you built by stealing my ideas and erasing my grandfather's legacy." "Your grandfather?" Victor scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "Thomas Reed was a washed-up engineer with one decent idea he had no clue how to market. If I hadn't stepped in, there would be no Archer Technologies. That washed-up engineer was a visionary who trusted you," I shot back, the familiar pain of my grandfather's betrayal rising in my throat. "He brought you in as a business partner, not to steal his company while he was fighting cancer." Victor's eyes narrowed. "Is that what this tantrum is about? Ancient history?" "For God's sake, Morgan, be professional. Your grandfather has been dead for 9 years. Get over it." Something cold and clarifying washed over me. At that moment, I saw Victor Klein with perfect clarity, not as the intimidating CEO who had held power over my career for 7 years, but as a fraud who had built his success on theft and deception. "You know what, Victor? You're right," I said, my voice calm now. "I should be more professional. In fact, I think it's time I started acting like the professional I am." Victor's expression shifted to something like relief. "Finally, some sense. Now get back in there and fix this mess. Tell them you misspoke or you're having a bad day or whatever. Just make it go away." I smiled, and something in that smile made Victor take a step back. "That's not what I meant," I said. "What I meant is that it's time I started acting like the majority shareholder of Archer Technologies." Victor's face went completely blank. "What? You heard me?" "You're delusional," he snorted, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes now. You own a few courtesy shares I gave you for employee retention. That's it. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my phone, pulling up a document and holding it where he could see it. Actually, I own 51% of Archer Technologies, I said. Have for about 3 years now. Victor stared at the screen, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, the beginning of fear. That's impossible, he whispered. This is fake. It has to be. It's very real, I assured him. While you were busy buying yachts and vacation homes, I was buying shares. Quietly. Carefully. Through a holding company you never bothered to investigate because you were too arrogant to imagine that your assistant could outmaneuver you. Victor lunged for my phone, but I stepped back, sliding it into my pocket. You can't do this, he hissed. The board serves at the pleasure of the majority shareholder. I cut him off. That's me, and after your little performance there. I gestured toward the conference room where the Westridge investors were undoubtedly wondering what drama was unfolding. Calling me lazy garbage in front of the most important investors in our company's history? I think I have ample grounds to call for your removal. Victor's face had lost all color now, the realization of his position finally sinking in. You wouldn't, he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. I straightened my blazer, smoothed my hair, and looked him directly in the eyes. Watch me. With that, I turned and walked back toward the conference room, leaving Victor frozen in the hallway. For the first time in 7 years, I felt the weight of pretense falling away. The real game was just beginning, and Victor Klein had no idea what was coming. I pushed open the conference room door with a newfound confidence. The weight of 7 years of submission suddenly lifted from my shoulders. The Westridge investors looked up expectantly, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and concern. Victor hadn't followed me back in. I could only imagine him standing in the hallway, his privileged world crumbling around him. Good. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice steady and clear, I want to apologize for that interruption. I believe we were discussing the financial projections for our new security platform. Sandra Westridge, the firm's managing partner, raised an elegant eyebrow. Ms. Reed, perhaps we should address what just happened. Mr. Klein seemed upset. I smiled, placing my hands on the conference table. Yes, he did. And that brings me to something important you should know before we continue. I took a deep breath. Victor Klein is no longer in a position to represent Archer Technologies in these negotiations. The room fell silent. 6 pairs of eyes stared at me with varying degrees of shock and intrigue. As of this moment, I continued, I am exercising my authority as majority shareholder to temporarily suspend Victor Klein from his duties as CEO, pending a formal board review. Majority shareholder? Michael Chen, Westridge's tech analyst, leaned forward. Our due diligence indicated that Mr. Klein holds the controlling interest in Archer. I nodded, understanding their confusion. That information is outdated. Through a holding company called Phoenix Ventures, I acquired a controlling interest in Archer Technologies approximately 3 years ago. I'm happy to provide the documentation for your legal team to review. I caught Tina's shocked expression from the doorway. She had been with the company almost as long as I had, but even she hadn't known the full extent of my plan. This is unexpected, Sandra said carefully. Perhaps we should reconvene once your company has sorted through its leadership situation. I understand your concern, I replied, but I want to assure you that this transition won't affect the development of our security platform. In fact, I paused, considering my next words carefully. I was the primary architect of the platform we've been discussing. I can answer any technical questions you might have, probably better than Victor could. That caught their attention. For the next hour, I guided the Westridge team through the technical specifications and market strategy behind our security platform. Without Victor's interruptions and grandstanding, the meeting flowed naturally. By the end, the investors seemed more engaged than they had during Victor's presentation. "Ms. Reed," Sandra said as the meeting concluded, "this has been illuminating. We'll need to discuss it internally, of course, but I think it's fair to say we're still very interested in Archer's technology." "Please call me Morgan," I said, shaking her hand. "And thank you for your patience today. I look forward to hearing from you." As the investors filed out, Tina approached me, her expression a mixture of awe and concern. "Morgan, what just happened?" she whispered. "Security just escorted Victor out of the building. He was shouting about lawyers and lawsuits and— Is it true? Do you really own the company?" I nodded, the reality of what I'd done finally sinking in. "I do. And it's a long story, one that started long before either of us joined Archer. That evening I sat alone in my office now, staring out at the Seattle skyline at dusk painted the city in shades of purple and gold. The executive floor was quiet, most employees having gone home, confused by the day's dramatic events. Tomorrow would bring questions, challenges, the inevitable corporate chaos that follows a leadership coup. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and pulled out an old photograph I'd secretly kept there for years. A faded picture of an older man standing in front of a garage workshop. Thomas Reed, my grandfather, on the day he founded what would eventually become Archer Technologies. The company hadn't been called Archer back then. It was Reed Innovations, a small startup focused on network security solutions that my grandfather had launched after 30 years as a systems engineer at Boeing. He'd poured his retirement savings and decades of expertise into creating a more secure framework for computer networks, back when most companies were only beginning to realize the importance of digital security. I traced my finger over his face. In the photograph, Grandpa Tom, with his kind eyes and perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, always smelling of coffee and circuit boards. He'd raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 12, bringing me to his workshop after school, patiently explaining algorithms and network architecture while other kids my age were watching cartoons. "The future is in protecting information, Morgan," he used to tell me. "Anyone can build a network, but the real value is in keeping it safe." By the time I graduated with my computer science degree, Reed Innovations had grown from that garage workshop to a promising security firm with 15 employees and several patents. But success had brought new challenges. My grandfather was brilliant with technology but struggled with the business aspects of running a growing company. That's when Victor Klein entered our lives. At 35, Victor had already built a reputation as a tech industry fixer, someone who could take promising startups and position them for major growth. With his MBA from Stanford and his network of industry connections, he seemed like the perfect business partner for my grandfather's growing company. I remember the day they signed the partnership agreement. Victor had been all smiles and promises, assuring my grandfather that Reed Innovations would become a major player in the security industry within 5 years. My grandfather, already showing early signs of the cancer that would eventually take his life, had been grateful for the help. "Victor knows the business side, Morgan," he'd told me. "With him handling the investors and marketing, I can focus on the technology. It's the perfect partnership." I hadn't trusted Victor from the beginning. There was something calculated behind his charm, something cold in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. But my grandfather was wearing down, the cancer treatments taking their toll, and he needed help running the company he'd built from nothing. What we didn't know, what my trusting grandfather never suspected, was that Victor had already begun, laying the groundwork to take control of Reed Innovations. The restructuring came first. Victor convinced my grandfather that to attract serious investors, they needed to reorganize the company under a new corporate entity. Reed Innovations became a subsidiary of the newly formed Archer Technologies, named after the street where Victor had grown up in San Francisco. "It's just branding," Victor had assured my grandfather when I questioned the name change. Reed Innovations will still exist as our R&D division. This is just to give us a more marketable corporate identity. My grandfather had agreed, too focused on his declining health and the new security framework he was developing to worry about corporate structure. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. I pulled another document from the drawer, the original partnership agreement, which I'd found years after my grandfather's death. Victor had structured the deal so that while my grandfather retained ownership of Reed Innovations, the intellectual property developed by the company automatically transferred to Archer Technologies, where Victor held the controlling interest. It was brilliant, in a predatory way. Victor had effectively separated my grandfather from his own creations, all while maintaining the illusion of partnership. When my grandfather's cancer took a turn for the worse, Victor made his final move. He approached my grandfather in the hospital with an offer to buy his remaining shares in Reed Innovations. "You need to focus on your health, Tom," Victor had said, all concerned expression and sympathetic tone. "Let me handle the business worries. The money from the buyout will cover your medical bills and leave something for Morgan's future." My grandfather, weak from chemotherapy and worried about leaving me with nothing, had signed the papers. 2 weeks later, he was gone. And Victor. Klein was the undisputed owner of both Archer Technologies and Reed Innovations. I was 22, grieving, and suddenly without the only family I had left. Victor, in what he probably considered an act of charity, offered me an entry-level position at Archer. "Your grandfather would want you to be part of his legacy," Victor had said at the funeral, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "Come work for me and I'll make sure you learn the business from the ground up." What choice did I have? I had student loans to pay off, an apartment I could barely afford, and a resume with no work experience. So I accepted his offer, swallowed my suspicions, and joined Archer Technologies as an assistant project manager. For the first few years, I kept my head down and learned everything I could about the company my grandfather had built. I watched as Victor systematically erased Thomas Reed from Archer's history, rewriting the company's origin story with himself as the visionary founder. In public statements and investor presentations, my grandfather became, at most, an early employee who had contributed to Victor's grand vision. But what Victor didn't realize, what his arrogance prevented him from seeing, was that I was my grandfather's granddaughter in more ways than one. I had inherited not just his aptitude for technology, but his meticulous attention to detail and his patience. While Victor was busy playing the role of tech industry visionary, I was quietly learning every aspect of the business, making myself indispensable and waiting for my opportunity. That opportunity came 5 years ago, when one of Archer's original investors, Harold Winters, approached me after a company holiday party. "You're Thomas Reed's granddaughter, aren't you?" he'd asked, swirling the ice in his whiskey glass. "You look just like him." I'd been surprised. By that point, few people at Archer even remembered my grandfather's connection to the company. "I am," I confirmed. "Did you know him?" Harold nodded, his expression turning somber. "I was one of his first investors, back when it was still Reed Innovations. Tom was a good man, brilliant engineer." He paused, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. What Victor did to him wasn't right. My heart had raced. For years, I'd thought I was the only one who knew the truth about how Victor had maneuvered my grandfather out of his own company. "You knew about that?" I asked, quietly. Harold's eyes met mine. "I was on the board when it happened. I objected, but I was outvoted. Victor had already convinced most of the investors that Tom was too sick to lead, that the company would fail without a change in management." He sighed. "I've regretted not doing more ever since." That conversation with Harold became the catalyst for my plan. Over coffee the following week, he explained that he was planning to sell his 8% stake in Archer and retire. "I'd rather sell to you than back to Victor," he told me. "But I know you can't afford the market rate on your salary." That's when we devised the strategy. Harold would sell me his shares at a significantly reduced price, with a payment plan structured over 5 years. To keep Victor from discovering the transaction, we set up a holding company called Phoenix Ventures, named after the bird that rises from the ashes, just as I plan to resurrect my grandfather's legacy from the ashes of Victor's deception. Phoenix Ventures will appear as just another investment firm on Archer's shareholder registry, Harold explained. Victor won't look twice at it. With Harold's 8% as my foundation, I began the slow, careful process of acquiring more shares. I lived frugally, pouring every spare dollar into buying Archer stock. When the company went through a rough patch and the share price dipped, I took out a loan against my grandfather's house, the only asset of his I'd managed to keep, to purchase more. I created elaborate proxy structures to hide my acquisitions, using different investment vehicles and taking advantage of Victor's lack of attention to the shareholder registry. He was too busy playing the role of tech mogul to notice that the ownership of his company was gradually shifting. 3 years ago, when I finally crossed the 51% threshold, I had celebrated alone in my apartment with a single glass of champagne. I could have made my move then, but I wanted more than just control of the company. I wanted Victor to understand exactly what he had lost and why. So I waited, continuing to play the role of the competent but unthreatening operations director, the employee who made Victor look good while he took credit for my work. I documented everything, every idea he stole, every contract he mismanaged, every ethical corner he cut. I built my case meticulously, knowing that when I finally made my move, Victor would fight back with everything he had. And now, sitting in what had been Victor's office just hours before, I realized that the confrontation in front of the Westridge investors couldn't have been more perfect. Victor had exposed his true character at the worst possible moment, giving me not just the legal grounds to challenge his leadership, but the perfect audience to witness his downfall. My phone buzzed with a text from Tina. Security has cleared out Victor's personal items. The board members are all asking what's happening. What should I tell them? I took a deep breath, looking once more at my grandfather's photograph before carefully returning it to the drawer. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, emergency board meetings, and undoubtedly, Victor's attempts to regain control. But tonight, for the first time in 9 years, I felt like my grandfather's legacy was finally back in the right hands. I texted Tina back. Tell them there will be an emergency board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. and Tina, thank you for everything today. Setting down my phone, I swiveled the chair to face the Seattle skyline, now twinkling with city lights against the dark sky. Victor had always loved this view. He'd chosen this office specifically for the panoramic. Windows that showcased what he called his corporate empire. Now it was my view, my company. My grandfather's legacy was restored. The real work was just beginning. Sleep eluded me that night. I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my modest downtown apartment, watching the rain trace silvery paths down the glass. The Seattle skyline, blurred through the downpour, the lights of the city trembling like uncertain stars. So much had changed in the past 12 hours. The carefully constructed facade I'd maintained for 7 years had finally cracked, bringing both exhilaration and anxiety in equal measure. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since I'd left the office. Emails from board members, texts from concerned executives, voicemails from Victor himself, ranging from threats to desperate bargaining. I had silenced it all, needing these quiet hours to prepare for tomorrow's battlefield. On my dining table lay the arsenal I had meticulously assembled over years. Folders containing documented evidence of Victor's mismanagement, legal opinions, confirming my controlling interest and the comprehensive strategy I had developed for transitioning leadership. A chess player preparing her endgame. But strategy wasn't enough. I needed allies. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in months. "Do you have any idea what time it is?" came a groggy voice after 4 rings. "It's time to fulfill that promise you made to my grandfather," I replied. There was a pause, followed by the sound of movement, as if the person on the other end was sitting up in bed. Morgan, what happened? Robert Hargrove had been my grandfather's attorney for 20 years before Victor pushed him out of Archer's legal affairs. Now, in his 60s and semi-retired, he was one of the few people who knew the full story of how Victor had maneuvered my grandfather out of his own company. I've made my move against Victor, I said. I need you at Archer headquarters tomorrow at 8 a.m. before the emergency board meeting. My God, Robert whispered. You actually did it? After all these years of planning? I did, I confirmed. And now I need the best corporate attorney in Seattle to help me finish what we started. Robert chuckled, sounding fully awake now. I always told Tom his granddaughter was smarter than the rest of us combined. I'll be there. And Morgan? He would be damn proud of you. After hanging up, I turned back to my preparations. The emergency board meeting would be my first true test. Victor would come armed with his own lawyers, his own narrative, and 7 years of cultivating loyalty among the board members. But I had something more powerful: irrefutable evidence and the legal authority of majority ownership. I opened my laptop and began composing an email to be sent to all board members at 7 a.m. tomorrow. It would outline the basic facts of the situation without delving into the emotional aspects of my history with Victor. Business people respected clear, unemotional communication, something Victor, with his volatile temperament, had never mastered. By the time the first hint of dawn brightened the eastern sky, I had finalized my strategy for the day ahead. I showered, dressed in my most authoritative charcoal suit, and headed to Archer headquarters 2 hours earlier than usual. The security team gave me curious looks as I arrived. News of yesterday's confrontation had clearly spread throughout the building. "Good morning, Ms. Reed," said Carl, the head of security, with newfound deference. "I've been instructed to grant you access to all executive areas as requested." "Thank you, Carl," I replied. "And who gave those instructions?" "Ms. Williams from HR, ma'am. After the incident yesterday." Interesting. Diane Williams, our HR director, had always been firmly in Victor's camp. Her quick pivot suggested she sensed which way the wind was blowing. "I appreciate that. I'll need access to the executive boardroom at 7:30. My attorney will be arriving at 8. Carl nodded. "Of course, Ms. Reed, and if it's not out of line." To say so, a lot of us down here are glad to see someone finally stand up to Mr. Klein. I offered him a small smile. "It's not out of line at all, Carl. Thank you." As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I considered how many other employees might be silently celebrating Victor's downfall. He'd cultivated a culture of fear and favoritism at Archer, rewarding sycophants and discarding anyone who questioned his methods. The company's turnover rate had been abysmal for years, with talented engineers and developers leaving for competitors after experiencing Victor's leadership style. That would be one of my first priorities after securing control: rebuilding Archer's corporate culture to reflect the values my grandfather had originally envisioned. The executive floor was eerily quiet as I made my way to what had been Victor's office. Despite the dramatic events of yesterday afternoon, his personal items had already been removed, leaving the space oddly impersonal. I ran my fingertips along the edge of the mahogany desk, still not quite believing that this space was now mine. A soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Tina stood in the doorway, looking exhausted but resolute. "You're here early," she observed. "Big day," I replied. "How are you holding up?" She entered the office, clutching her tablet like a shield. "Honestly, I've been up all night trying to process what happened. I've worked for Victor for 5 years and suddenly—" She gestured around the office. "Everything's changed." I studied her carefully. Tina had been Victor's gatekeeper, managing his schedule, screening his calls, and occasionally covering for his more egregious behavior. But she'd always treated the rest of the staff with kindness, often running interference to protect them from Victor's worst moods. Things are going to change a lot more in the coming days, I said. I need to know where you stand, Tina. She straightened her shoulders. I stand with Archer Technologies. I always have. She paused, then added more quietly. Victor could be difficult, but the company is more than just him. It's all of us. The engineers who build the products, the sales team that brings in clients, the support staff that keeps everything running. I nodded, relieved. That's exactly right. And that's the vision I intend to restore. Then I'm with you, she said decisively. What do you need from me today? For the next hour, Tina and I prepared for the board meeting. She briefed me on each board member's likely position, helping me anticipate resistance and identify potential allies. As Victor's executive assistant, she'd been privy to conversations and dynamics I hadn't been able to observe directly. Melissa Hammond will be your biggest challenge, Tina warned, referring to the board's vice chair. She and Victor have been close for years, professionally and possibly otherwise. And the others? David Chen is analytical. Show him the numbers and he'll follow the logic. Patricia Okafor cares most about the company's public image. She'll worry about how this transition affects our stock price and client relationships. James Wilson and Taylor Rodriguez are wild cards. They've disagreed with Victor in the past, but might be concerned about the disruption of leadership change. This insider knowledge was invaluable. I made mental notes about how to approach each board member, tailoring my presentation to address their specific concerns. At 8 a.m. sharp, Robert Hargrove arrived. Despite being pulled from sleep just hours earlier, he looked impeccable in a tailored navy suit, his silver hair perfectly combed, carrying a leather briefcase that had probably witnessed decades of corporate battles. "Morgan," he said warmly, embracing me. "You look exactly like your mother." The unexpected comparison caught me off guard. My mother had died when I was 12, and memories of her had faded over time. "Thank you," I managed, throat suddenly tight. "That means a lot." Robert's expression softened. "She and your grandfather would be tremendously proud of what you're doing today." He glanced around the office. "So, this is where the dragon has been holding court all these years?" I smiled at his characterization of Victor. "It is, though I'm hoping to change the energy of the place. I have no doubt you will." He set his briefcase on the conference table and clicked it open. "Now, let's review our strategy for the board meeting. Victor won't go down without a fight, and I suspect he spent the night rallying whatever allies he has left. For the next 30 minutes, Robert and I fine-tuned our approach, anticipating Victor's arguments and preparing counterpoints. When Tina informed us that board members had begun arriving in the main boardroom, we were ready. "Remember," Robert said as we walked down the hallway, "you're not just legally in the right, you're morally in the right. This company was built on your grandfather's innovation, and today you're reclaiming his legacy. Stand tall." The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 5 board members sat around the massive oak table, expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. Victor had not yet arrived, but his presence was palpable in the tension that filled the room. "Good morning," I said, taking my place at the head of the table, a position Victor had always occupied. "Thank you all for making time for this emergency meeting. I know yesterday's events have raised many questions, and I'm here to provide clarity." Melissa Hammond, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, leaned forward. "Clarity would be welcome, Ms. Reed. Many of us are struggling to understand how a director of operations is suddenly claiming to control this company." Robert stepped forward smoothly. "Perhaps I can help with that. I'm Robert Hargrove, counsel for Ms. Reed, and formerly counsel for Thomas Reed, the original founder of what is now Archer Technologies." He distributed folders to each board member. "The documentation before you confirms that Morgan Reed, through her holding company Phoenix Ventures, has acquired 51.3% of Archer's outstanding shares, making her the controlling shareholder of this corporation. The board members flipped through the documents with varying degrees of disbelief. David Chen, the analytical member Tina had mentioned, studied the papers carefully through his wire-rimmed glasses. "These acquisitions date back 3 years," he observed. "Why act now?" I met his gaze directly. Because yesterday, Victor Klein demonstrated once again that his leadership style is detrimental to this company's future. Berating a senior executive in front of potential investors worth $85 million is not just personally offensive, it's financially reckless. Before anyone could respond, the boardroom door banged open. Victor stormed in, followed by a tall man in an expensive suit who I recognized as Julian Porter, one of Seattle's most aggressive corporate attorneys. "This is absurd," Victor announced, his face flushed with anger. "Whatever Morgan has told you is a manipulation of the facts. This is nothing but a vindictive employee trying to stage a corporate coup." Robert remained unruffled. "Mr. Klein, if you'd taken the time to review the shareholder registry more carefully over the past few years, this wouldn't come as such a shock to you." Victor slammed his hand on the table. "These share acquisitions were done in secret, deliberately concealed, through shell companies and proxies. It's corporate espionage, and it's illegal." "Actually," Robert replied, "there is nothing illegal about purchasing publicly traded shares through legitimate investment vehicles. Ms. Reed disclosed her holdings as required by SEC regulations. The information was there for anyone who cared to look." Julian Porter stepped forward. "The board should be aware that we're preparing to file an injunction this morning, challenging the validity of these share purchases. Ms. Reed used her position inside Archer to gather non-public information that guided her acquisition strategy, which constitutes insider trading. I had anticipated this exact argument." "That's categorically false," I stated calmly. "Every share purchase was made during appropriate trading windows, following all SEC regulations. I never use non-public information to guide investment decisions." I turned to the board. "But Victor's accusation raises an interesting point about using one's position improperly." I nodded to Tina, who distributed a second set of folders to the board members. "What you're now receiving is a detailed accounting of instances where Victor Klein has used company resources for personal benefit, misrepresented development timelines to investors, and taken credit for innovations developed by Archer's engineering team, specifically innovations that I personally developed." The board members exchanged glances as they reviewed the new documents. Even Melissa Hammond's expression had shifted from hostility to concern as she flipped through the pages. "This is character assassination," Victor snarled. "You've been planning this ambush for years, collecting so-called evidence to smear me when you made your move." "It's not an ambush, Victor," I replied evenly. "It's accountability, something you've managed to avoid for far too long." Patricia Okafor, the board member concerned with public image, cleared her throat. "These allegations are concerning, but my immediate question is about the Westridge investment. Have they pulled out following yesterday's incident?" "They haven't," I answered. "I spoke with Sandra Westridge last night. They're still interested in our security platform but want assurance of stable leadership before proceeding." Victor scoffed. "And you think you represent stable leadership? You've been an operations director for 3 years. You have zero experience as a CEO." "I have zero experience taking credit for other people's work," I countered. "But extensive experience actually developing the products that have made Archer successful." I turned to address the board directly. "What Victor isn't telling you is that I was the primary architect of the security platform that Westridge wants to invest in. The same platform he's been presenting as his brainchild for the past year." David Chen adjusted his glasses. "Is this true, Victor?" Victor's face darkened. "Morgan has been part of a team working under my direction. Any contributions she's made have been within the framework I established." I smiled thinly. "Would you like me to ask our lead developers who actually wrote the code, designed the architecture, and led the project meetings? Because I'm happy to bring them in right now. The threat hung in the air. Victor knew as well as I did that the development team would confirm my version of events. For all his faults, Victor had never been technically skilled. His talent had always been in marketing and self-promotion, not product development. Julian Porter, sensing the shift in the room, attempted to redirect the conversation. The board should focus on what's best for the company right now. A leadership battle will destabilize Archer at a critical moment, potentially jeopardizing not just the Westridge investment, but all our client relationships. Robert nodded sagely. For once, I agree with Mr. Porter. Stability is indeed crucial, which is why Ms. Reed has prepared a comprehensive transition plan. He gestured to me to continue. I opened my laptop and connected it to the boardroom's projection system. What I'm presenting now is a 30, 60, 90-day transition plan that will ensure Archer not only maintains stability, but emerges stronger from this leadership change. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined my vision for Archer's future, a return to the innovative, engineer-driven culture my grandfather had originally created, combined with a modern approach to market expansion. I detailed how we would communicate the transition to employees, clients, and investors, emphasizing continuity of our core business while signaling positive change in leadership style. As I spoke, I could see the board members' expressions shifting. Even Melissa Hammond was taking notes, her earlier hostility replaced by reluctant interest. Victor, meanwhile, grew increasingly agitated, his face cycling through shades of red as he watched his support evaporating. When I finished my presentation, the room fell silent for a moment. Then David Chen spoke. Ms. Reed, while I'm concerned about the manner in which this situation has unfolded, I can't deny the thoroughness of your transition plan. He glanced at Victor, then back to me. And if the documentation you've provided is accurate, there are serious questions about Mr. Klein's leadership that need to be addressed. Victor stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. I built Archer from nothing into a company worth hundreds of millions. Without me, there would be no security platform for Westridge to invest in. No jobs for any of you. Nothing. I couldn't let that pass. You didn't build Archer from nothing, Victor. My grandfather founded this company as Reed Innovations long before you arrived. You changed the name and rewrote the history, but you didn't create the foundation that made our success possible. Victor's eyes narrowed. Your grandfather was a tinkerer with one decent idea and no business sense. I made this company what it is. The casual dismissal of my grandfather's legacy ignited a cold fury within me. My grandfather was a brilliant engineer who trusted the wrong person when he was dying of cancer. You didn't build on his foundation. You stole it and claimed it as your own. The boardroom went utterly still. None of the board members had known this part of Archer's history. Victor had made sure of that. James Wilson, who had been quiet, until now, leaned forward. Is this true, Victor? Was Archer originally Reed Innovations? Victor's silence was damning. Robert seized the moment, passing another document to the board members. This is the original incorporation document for Reed Innovations, founded by Thomas Reed in 1997, along with the subsequent restructuring paperwork that created Archer Technologies as a parent company in 2016, shortly before Mr. Reed's death, from pancreatic cancer. The board members studied the documents, the atmosphere in the room shifting palpably. What had begun as an emergency meeting to address a power struggle was now revealing a deeper story about Archer's origins and Victor's role in burying them. Patricia Okafor looked up from the papers, her expression troubled. If I understand correctly, Morgan Reed is not only the majority shareholder of this company, but also the granddaughter of its original founder? That's correct, Robert confirmed. And now she's reclaiming her family's legacy while offering Archer a path forward that honors its true origins. Victor's face had gone from red to ashen. For perhaps the first time since I'd known him, he seemed at a loss for words. I stood, addressing the board with quiet confidence. I didn't call this meeting to relitigate the past. I called it to chart Archer's future. As the majority shareholder, I have the legal authority to remove Victor as CEO. But I believe this company will be stronger if we move forward with unity of purpose, which is why I'm asking for the board's support. One by one, the board members looked at each other, then at Victor, and finally at me. The momentum had shifted. In the space of an hour, I had transformed from an upstart employee to a compelling alternative to Victor's volatile leadership. The silent strategist had finally spoken. And for once, everyone was listening. All in favor of accepting Morgan Reed's temporary appointment as acting CEO, pending a formal leadership review in 90 days? James Wilson, who had assumed the role of meeting chair after Victor's explosive exit, looked around the boardroom. One by one, hands rose. First David Chen, then Patricia Okafor, followed by Taylor Rodriguez. After a moment's hesitation, even Melissa Hammond raised her hand, though her expression remained guarded. "Motion passes unanimously," Wilson declared, looking almost relieved. "Ms. Reed, the board confirms your appointment as acting CEO of Archer Technologies, effective immediately." I nodded, maintaining my composure despite the surge of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. "Thank you for your trust. I promise you won't regret this decision." The remainder of the meeting focused on logistics, announcing the leadership change to employees, coordinating communications with key clients, and preparing statements for the press. By the time we adjourned, it was nearly noon, and the reality of what had just happened was finally sinking in. I was now the CEO of Archer Technologies. As the board members filed out, Robert squeezed my shoulder. "Congratulations, Morgan. Tom would be beaming with pride right now." "We're not done yet," I reminded him. "Victor won't accept this quietly." "No, he won't," Robert agreed. "Julian's probably drafting legal challenges as we speak. But we have both the legal leverage and the moral high ground." He checked his watch. "I'll head to the courthouse to check if they've filed anything yet. You focus on stabilizing the company." After Robert left, I sat alone in the boardroom, allowing myself a single moment of quiet triumph before tackling the mountain of work ahead. The company I'd joined as an entry-level assistant 7 years ago was now under my leadership. The path to this moment had been longer and more difficult than I could have ever imagined, but the real challenge was just beginning. Tina appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. "The executive team is waiting in the conference room. They've heard rumors, but no official word yet." I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. The next hour would set the tone for my leadership. Let's not keep them waiting. Archer's executive team consisted of 7 department heads, most of whom had been hired by Victor and owed their positions to his favor. As I entered the conference room, I could read the tension on their faces: concern, confusion, and in some cases, thinly veiled hostility. "Thank you all for your patience," I began, standing at the head of the table. "I know today has been chaotic, and you deserve clarity about what's happening." For the next 15 minutes, I explained the situation as straightforwardly as possible, emphasizing stability and continuity, while making it clear that the leadership change was final and board-approved. I watched their expressions shift as the reality sank in, some showing cautious optimism, others barely concealed dismay. "So Victor is gone? Just like that?" asked Mark Stevens, our marketing director and one of Victor's closest allies. "Mr. Klein has been removed as CEO by board action, yes," I confirmed. "And while I understand this is a shock, I need every person in this room focused on maintaining business operations during this transition." Diane Williams, the HR director who had already begun adapting to the new reality, leaned forward. "What? Should we tell the staff? There are already rumors flying everywhere." "We'll hold an all-hands meeting at 3 p.m., I decided. Until then, department heads should reassure their teams that business continues as usual, and all positions and projects remain secure. I looked around the table. Does anyone have concerns they'd like to address now, privately? After a brief silence, Rachel Chen, our normally quiet CTO, spoke up. What about the Westridge investment? The security platform is nearly ready for the next development phase, but we need that funding secured. I nodded, appreciating her focus on the company's immediate needs rather than the politics of the situation. I've already spoken with Sandra Westridge. They're still very interested in our platform, but wanted assurance about leadership stability. I'll be meeting with them again tomorrow morning to move the process forward. This seemed to reassure several executives whose departments depended on the expansion the Westridge investment would fund. Any other questions? I asked. Mark Stevens hadn't taken his eyes off me since I'd entered the room. Just one, he said, his tone deliberately casual. How long have you been planning this? The question hung in the air, its subtext clear. Mark was trying to paint me as a calculating usurper rather than a legitimate leader. I've owned a controlling interest in Archer for 3 years, I replied calmly. During that time, I've continued to serve the company faithfully as Director of Operations, helping build the security platform that represents our future. I chose to exercise my rights as majority shareholder only after Victor's behavior yesterday threatened an $85 million investment. I met his gaze directly. So, to answer your question, Mark, I've been preparing to lead this company effectively for years. Whether you see that as ambition or responsibility is up to you. After the meeting, I returned to my new office, Victor's former domain, to find Tina waiting with a stack of papers requiring immediate attention. The PR team needs approval on the press statement about the leadership change, she said, handing me the top document. And legal has prepared a restraining order in case Victor tries to access the building again. I raised an eyebrow. Did something happen while I was meeting with the executive team? Tina nodded grimly. Victor tried to enter the R&D floor about 30 minutes ago. Security stopped him, but he made quite a scene, threatened to sue everyone from the guards to the receptionist. This was concerning but not surprising. Approve the restraining order, I decided, and ask security to preserve any footage of the incident. Already done, Tina confirmed, making a note on her tablet. Oh, and the development team sent this. They said you'd want to see it right away. She handed me a thumb drive labeled Archer Sec, V7.3 in a handwriting I recognized as belonging to Ethan Park, our lead security architect. Thank you, Tina. I inserted the drive into my laptop. Could you give me a few minutes, and then we should prepare for the all-hands meeting? Once alone, I opened the files Ethan had sent. They contained the latest build of our security platform, the culmination of 3 years of development work. Victor had been so focused on marketing the platform to investors that he'd barely understood its technical specifications. But I had led its development from concept to execution, working directly with the engineering team while Victor took credit for our innovations. What Victor never knew, what no one except Ethan and 2 other senior developers knew, was that I had incorporated elements of my grandfather's original security framework into the platform's architecture. Thomas Reed's visionary approach to network security lived on in the code, his principles forming the foundation upon which we had built something revolutionary. Now, reviewing the final build, I felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The platform was everything my grandfather had envisioned, evolved for modern threats and infrastructure. It would transform how companies protect their data, and it would restore Archer Technologies to its rightful place as an industry leader in security innovation. My phone buzzed with a text from Robert. No filings yet from Victor's team. Unusual. Stay alert. The lack of immediate legal action was concerning. I had expected Victor to file injunctions by now, challenging my share ownership or the board's authority to remove him. His restraint suggested he might be planning something less straightforward. I buzzed Tina. Could you ask IT to audit all system access immediately? I want to know if anyone is accessing sensitive files or databases, especially financial records or intellectual property. Right away, she replied. Should I have them check Victor's account specifically? Yes, and his known associates within the company. And Tina? Let's move the all-hands meeting up to 2 p.m. I want to address the staff before any external communications. Go out. The next hour passed in a whirlwind of activity. I reviewed the press statement, consulted with our legal team about potential challenges from Victor, and prepared my remarks for the all-hands meeting. Throughout it all, a sense of watchful anticipation hung in the air, the calm before an inevitable storm. At 1:45, Tina appeared in my doorway looking troubled. It found something. Victor accessed the server containing our patent applications and R&D documentation last night at 11 p.m. after the confrontation with the Westridge investors. He downloaded several files related to the security platform. My stomach tightened. This was exactly what I had feared. Did they track what he took, specifically? The preliminary report shows he accessed the core algorithm documentation and the latest patent filings, Tina said. Both would be valuable to competitors. I reached for the phone. Get Robert back here immediately. And contact Judge Michaels. She's handled our intellectual property cases before. We need an emergency injunction preventing Victor from sharing or using any proprietary information. As I made the call to Judge Michaels' office, pieces of Victor's strategy became clear. If he couldn't maintain control of Archer through legal means, he would attempt to damage the company by leaking its most valuable intellectual property to competitors. By the time I arrived at the company auditorium for the all-hands meeting, the situation had escalated further. Robert had returned, bringing news that Victor had reached out to Archer's 3 largest competitors within hours of being removed as CEO. We've secured the emergency injunction, Robert informed me just before I took the stage. And we've notified the companies he contacted that any use of Archer's proprietary information would constitute intellectual property theft. I nodded, revising my planned remarks mentally to address this new development without creating panic among the staff. As I stepped onto the stage, facing nearly 300 employees whose livelihoods depended on Archer's success, the weight of responsibility settled fully on my shoulders. Good afternoon, I began, scanning the sea of uncertain faces. I'm Morgan Reed, and as some of you may have already heard, the board of directors has appointed me acting CEO of Archer Technologies, effective immediately. A murmur swept through the auditorium. Many employees looked confused, others exchanged knowing glances, having witnessed Victor's behavior over the years. I know leadership transitions can be unsettling, I continued, especially when they happen suddenly. But I want to assure you that this change will strengthen Archer, not weaken it. For the next 15 minutes, I outlined my vision for the company, emphasizing our return to the innovative, engineering-driven culture that had made Archer successful in its early days. I acknowledged the challenges we faced without mentioning Victor's attempted sabotage directly, focusing instead on our path forward. Some of you have been at Archer long enough to remember when we were still Reed Innovations, I said, watching recognition dawn on the faces of our longest-serving employees. What many of you may not know is that Thomas Reed, the founder of Reed Innovations, was my grandfather. This revelation caused another wave of whispers. I waited for them to subside before continuing. I joined Archer 7 years ago, not just as an employee, but as someone with a personal connection to this company's origins and potential. Today, we begin the process of reconnecting with those original values: innovation, integrity, and respect for the brilliant minds that make our products possible. By the time I finished speaking and opened the floor for questions, I could sense a shift in the room. The uncertainty remained, but it was now mingled with cautious optimism. The questions that followed were thoughtful and forward-looking. Concerns about project continuity, client relationships, and growth opportunities rather than politics or personalities. As the meeting concluded, Ethan Park approached the stage, several other developers trailing behind him. "That was illuminating," he said, his typical understatement making me smile. The team wanted you to know we're behind you. Victor never understood what we were building anyway. Thank you, Ethan. That means a lot. I glanced at the developers. Behind him, the core team who had been working on the security platform since its inception. I hope you're all ready for the next phase. We have a lot of work ahead. Ethan nodded, then hesitated. There's something else you should know. About an hour ago, I received a job offer from Meridian Systems. Meridian was one of our largest competitors, and one of the companies Victor had contacted after being removed. Let me guess, I said. Substantial salary increase, full creative control over their security division, and an immediate start date? Ethan's eyebrows rose. Almost word for word. How did you— Victor's trying to poach our key developers, I explained. He can't take our intellectual property directly because of legal protections, but he can try to take the minds behind it. I looked at the assembled developers. Has anyone else received similar offers? 4 hands went up. I thought so. I nodded, mind racing. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention immediately. Let's talk tomorrow morning about how we can ensure all of you feel valued here at Archer, financially and otherwise. After they left, Robert joined me at the edge of the stage. Victor's moving faster than I anticipated, he observed. Trying to gut our development team is a bold strategy. It's also predictable, I replied. He knows the security platform is our future. If he can't control it, he'll try to destroy it, or recreate it elsewhere. Robert frowned. The injunction prevents him from using our proprietary information, but it doesn't stop him from hiring our people. No, it doesn't. I gathered my notes, mind already formulating a counter-strategy. But we can make staying at Archer more attractive than following Victor into the unknown. Back in my office, I spent the next 2 hours on video calls with key clients, reassuring them about the leadership transition and our continued commitment to their projects. Most were cautiously supportive, though a few, particularly those with personal relationships with Victor, expressed concern about the sudden change. By 6 p.m., the immediate fires had been contained, but the day's events had made one thing abundantly clear. Victor was not going to fade away quietly. He was mobilizing every resource at his disposal to either regain control of Archer or ensure that no one else could profit from what he still viewed as his company. As twilight descended over Seattle, I stood at the windows of my new office, watching the city lights flicker to life. The view reminded me of standing in my apartment the night before, contemplating the battle ahead. So much had changed in 24 hours, yet the true test was still to come. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over, Morgan. You have no idea what you've started. V. I stared at the message, neither surprised nor intimidated. Victor had always relied on intimidation to maintain control, a tactic that had worked on others but never on me. I typed a simple reply. You're right about one thing, Victor. This isn't over. Then I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. The next phase of our security platform wouldn't develop itself, and I had developers to retain, clients to reassure, and a company to rebuild. Victor could plot and threaten all he wanted, but Archer Technologies was finally back in the hands of Reed. My grandfather's legacy was secure, and its future was just beginning. As I worked late into the night, finalizing plans to protect both our intellectual property and our human capital, I felt a sense of clarity that had eluded me during my years of careful preparation. The final pieces were falling into place. Victor's desperate attempts to undermine me had only confirmed what I'd known all along. He had never been the visionary he claimed to be. Without the ideas and innovations of others, he was just a man with an expensive suit and an overinflated ego. And now, for the first time, everyone else could see it too. I arrived at Archer headquarters the next morning just as dawn broke over the Seattle skyline. The early hour afforded me quiet moments to think as I walked through the empty halls, my footsteps echoing on the polished floors. This building had been my workplace for 7 years, but today it felt different. Today, I wasn't just passing through on my way to another day of silent work in Victor's shadow. Today, I was steering the ship. When I reached the executive floor, I was surprised to find I wasn't the first one there. Through the glass walls of the conference room, I could see Ethan Park hunched over his laptop, surrounded by empty coffee cups. He looked up as I approached. "Morning," he said, stifling a yawn. "Hope you don't mind. I needed a better Wi-Fi connection." "Have you been here all night?" I asked, noticing the rumpled state of his clothes. He nodded. "After our talk yesterday, I got thinking about Victor's next moves. He's already tried to poach the team, but that's just the beginning. The platform has vulnerabilities he knows about. Backdoors he insisted we build in so he could demonstrate emergency access protocols to clients." My blood ran cold. "Are you saying he could access client data once the platform is deployed?" "Potentially." Ethan turned his laptop around. "These are the access points he's aware of. I've been working on closing them and documenting the changes." I studied the screen, anger building as I realized what Victor had done. The backdoors weren't standard security protocols. They were deliberate vulnerabilities that Victor could have exploited for his own purposes. The man had been willing to compromise our entire security platform, the very thing our clients would trust to protect their most sensitive data. "This is unethical doesn't begin to cover it," I said, scrolling through Ethan's documentation. "Have you shown this to anyone else?" "Just Lisa and Raj from the core team. We've been quietly removing these features for months, telling Victor they were being redesigned for better performance. He never understood the technical details enough to question it." I felt a surge of gratitude for these developers who had protected our product's integrity despite pressure from above. "Thank you, Ethan. This could have been catastrophic for Archer's reputation." He shrugged, but I could see he understood the gravity of what they'd prevented. "It's our work, too. We weren't going to let him compromise it." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Those job offers from Meridian? Victor didn't just promise money. He told everyone he contacted that you were planning to scrap the current platform and start over with a true vision." "That's absurd," I said. "The platform is nearly ready for deployment. Why would I—" "We know," Ethan interrupted. "But some of the newer team members don't know you as well. They're worried about job security, project continuity, all the usual anxieties during leadership changes." This explained why some developers had seemed hesitant at yesterday's all-hands meeting. Victor was spreading misinformation, trying to create exactly the kind of instability that would drive talent away from Archer. "I need to address this immediately," I decided. "Can you gather the entire development team for a 9 a.m. meeting? And bring all documentation on these backdoors. We need to make sure they're completely eliminated before the Westridge demo." Ethan nodded, already typing an email. "I'll have everyone there." As Ethan left to prepare for the meeting, I settled into my office to review the schedule Tina had prepared. The day ahead was packed with critical tasks: the 9 a.m. meeting with the development team, a 10:30 call with our largest client, the 1 p.m. meeting with Westridge investors, and a 3 p.m. session with the marketing team to revise our messaging around the security platform. Between these fixed points were dozens of decisions requiring immediate attention: staffing changes, financial approvals, and the constant monitoring of Victor's activities. Robert had assigned a junior attorney to track any legal filings or business registrations under Victor's name, looking for signs he might be establishing a competing venture. At 8:30, Tina arrived with my third cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "2 things you need to know before your day starts," she said, setting down a folder on my desk. "First, Mark Stevens resigned this morning, sent his letter at 6 a.m. and cleaned out his office before anyone arrived." I wasn't surprised. As marketing director and Victor's closest ally, Mark had been visibly uncomfortable at yesterday's executive meeting. Did he say where he's going? No, but IT security reports he downloaded our entire marketing strategy and client list before departing. Tina's expression grew more troubled. Which brings me to the second issue. The Journal called for comment. On a story they're running tomorrow. Apparently, Victor has given them an exclusive interview about a hostile takeover at Archer by an inexperienced operations director with a personal vendetta. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Victor was playing exactly the game I had anticipated, attacking my credibility and experience while positioning himself as the wronged visionary. What's our response time for the Journal piece? I asked. They'll hold us until 2 p.m. for our statement. Tina replied, have PR draft something factual but non-inflammatory. Confirm my position as majority shareholder and board-appointed CEO. Emphasize our focus on innovation and client service, and note that we wish Mr. Klein well in his future endeavors. I smiled thinly. Kill him with professionalism. Tina nodded, making notes on her tablet. And what about Mark's departure? We'll need a new marketing director. Promote Sarah Chen from the product marketing team, I decided. She's been doing the real strategic work for months anyway. Offer her Mark's salary plus 15% and full creative control over repositioning our brand. By 9 a.m., the large conference room was filled with 23 developers, ranging from recent college graduates to industry veterans. The tension in the room was palpable. These were brilliant, sought-after professionals suddenly caught in a corporate power struggle. Their futures, and the future of the platform they'd built, hung in the balance. I didn't waste time with platitudes. I understand Victor has been reaching out to many of you with job offers and claims about my intentions for the security platform, I began, meeting their gazes directly. I'm here to set the record straight. For the next 45 minutes, I outlined my vision for the platform and Archer's future, not as vague corporate speak, but with the technical specificity of someone who had helped build the product from its earliest stages. I discussed the upcoming Westridge investment, the deployment timeline, and the central role each developer would play in the next phase. Most importantly, I concluded, I want to address the backdoor access points that Victor insisted on building into the platform. A ripple of surprise ran through the room. While Ethan and his core team had known about these vulnerabilities, many of the other developers had been working on different components of the platform. These access points will be removed permanently before our next release, I stated firmly. Archer's security products will never compromise client data. Not for demonstration purposes, not for emergency access, not for any reason. Our reputation depends on absolute integrity. The mood in the room shifted visibly as I spoke. The younger developers relaxed, while the more experienced team members exchanged approving glances. By the time I opened the floor for questions, the earlier tension had been replaced by cautious optimism. What about our compensation packages? Asked Lisa Mendez, one of our senior security architects. Meridian's offering significant increases to join their new security division. By the end of day, each of you will receive a revised compensation package reflecting your true value to Archer, I promised. I won't engage in a bidding war with Victor or Meridian, but I will ensure that you're compensated fairly for your expertise and loyalty. After answering several more questions about project timelines and technical direction, I concluded the meeting with a commitment that seemed to resonate deeply with the team. Under my leadership, the people who build our products will receive the recognition and rewards for their innovation. No more executives taking credit for your brilliance. As the developers filed out, many stopped to speak with me one-on-one, sharing concerns or insights that they hadn't wanted to voice publicly. Ethan lingered until everyone else had left. That went better than I expected, he observed. I think we'll keep most of the team intact. Most isn't all, I noted. Who are we at risk of losing? Ethan considered for a moment. Jason and Tyler are probably going to Meridian. They've always been more impressed by Victor's style than substance. But the core architecture team is staying. That's what matters most. I nodded, mentally adjusting our project timeline to account for the potential departures. We can handle 2 losses. Let's make sure it's not more. The 10:30 call with Helix Systems, our largest client, proved more challenging. Their CTO, Daniel Wright, had worked closely with Victor for years and was openly skeptical about the leadership change. "No offense, Morgan, but we signed with Archer because of Victor's vision for the security platform," he said, his voice cool over the speakerphone. "Our board is concerned about continuity and delivery timelines." "I understand your concern, Daniel," I replied, "but I want to clarify something important. The security platform was my vision, not Victor's. I've led its development from concept through execution while Victor handled the client-facing presentations." There was a pause on the line. "That's not how Victor presented it to us." "I'm not surprised," I said, "but I'm happy to demonstrate my technical knowledge of the platform in as much detail as you'd like. In fact, I'd welcome the opportunity to show you some enhanced features we're implementing for the next release, features that eliminate potential security vulnerabilities." Over the next 30 minutes, I walked Daniel through the platform's architecture, addressing specific security concerns that Helix had raised in previous meetings. By the time we concluded the call, his tone had shifted from skepticism to cautious respect. "Send me the revised specifications for those vulnerability patches," he requested. "If they're as robust as you've described, we're still on board." One potential crisis averted, but the most critical meeting still lay ahead, the 1 p.m. session with Westridge Capital. Without their $85 million investment, our expansion plans would be severely delayed, giving Victor and Meridian a potential opening to beat us to market with a competing product. I spent the hour before the Westridge meeting reviewing our presentation with Sarah Chen, our newly appointed marketing director. Unlike her predecessor, Sarah had a deep technical background before moving into marketing, allowing her to translate complex security concepts into compelling business benefits. The key is to show them that not only is the platform's development on track, but our leadership transition actually strengthens its market position, Sarah suggested, modifying a slide that had emphasized Victor's role. Less personality cult, more collective expertise. Exactly, I agreed. Westridge isn't investing in a figurehead. They're investing in technology and the team behind it. At precisely 1 p.m., Sandra Westridge and her team arrived for the presentation. I greeted them in the lobby personally, noting their surprised expressions at this departure from Victor's habit of keeping investors waiting. "Thank you for your flexibility in rescheduling, Ms. Westridge," I said as I escorted them to the conference room. "I know the past 2 days have raised questions about Archer's direction." Sandra's expression remained neutral. "Indeed they have, Ms. Reed. We're interested to hear how this transition affects our potential investment." The conference room had been prepared with demonstrations of the security platform running on multiple devices. Ethan and 2 other senior developers waited to provide technical validation during the presentation. For the next hour, we walked the Westridge team through every aspect of the platform, emphasizing the features that most directly addressed their portfolio company's security needs. Throughout the presentation, I was careful to highlight the contributions of our development team, giving Ethan and his colleagues the opportunity to showcase their expertise. "What I find most compelling," Sandra commented as we concluded, "is the clear technical depth behind this platform. Our previous meetings with Mr. Klein left some of our technical advisors concerned that the promises exceeded Archer's capabilities." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Victor had been skilled at making grandiose claims without the technical knowledge to back them up. "At Archer, we believe in under-promising and over-delivering," I replied. "Everything we've shown you today is fully functional, not conceptual." Sandra exchanged glances with her team before turning back to me. "We'd like to move forward with the investment under the terms we discussed previously, with one modification. We want a seat on Archer's board of directors." This was a significant request, but not an unreasonable one given the size of their Investment. I believe that can be arranged, I said. Our bylaws allow for board expansion with majority shareholder approval. I smiled. Which, fortunately, I can provide. By the time the Westridge team departed, we had a handshake agreement on the investment terms, with formal documents to follow within the week. As I walked them to the elevator, Sandra held back for a private word. You know, we almost walked away after that disaster with Victor, she confided. But something told me to wait, to see how Archer responded to the crisis. She studied me with newfound respect. I'm glad we did. Your grandfather built a strong foundation here. I think you're the right person to build upon it. I tried not to show my surprise. You knew my grandfather? Sandra smiled. I was a junior analyst when Reed Innovations was seeking its first round of funding. Tom Reed impressed everyone with his integrity and vision. She pressed the elevator button. Victor never mentioned your connection to the founder, which now seems deliberate. Victor preferred his version of Archer's history, I acknowledged. Well, I look forward to seeing your version of its future, Sandra said as the elevator arrived. Don't make me regret this investment, Morgan. I won't, I promised, meaning it with every fiber of my being. As the elevator doors closed, I allowed myself a moment of quiet celebration. The Westridge investment wasn't just capital. It was validation of our technology and my leadership at a critical moment. With their support, we could accelerate development and market penetration, establishing Archer as the security partner of choice for enterprise clients. Victor might have Meridian's resources at his disposal, but we had superior technology, a more cohesive team, and now, the financial backing to execute our vision. For the first time since taking control of Archer, I felt the balance of power shift decisively in our favor. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a blur of meetings, decisions, and putting out the occasional fire. By 6 p.m., the revised compensation packages for our development team had been approved and distributed. The press statement regarding Victor's accusations had been crafted and sent to the Journal, and Sarah had assembled a preliminary marketing strategy that emphasized Archer's technical expertise rather than executive personalities. As the office quieted for the evening, I found myself drawn to the small conference room where my grandfather had once worked during Reed Innovations' early days. The room had been repurposed multiple times over the years, but I could still sense his presence there, his dedication, his integrity, his belief that technology should serve people, not exploit them. I pulled out my phone and opened the financial tracking app where I monitored Archer's stock price. After an initial dip following the news of Victor's departure, the price had stabilized and was now trending upward as the market processed the Westridge investment news. The company was weathering the storm. We had secured the investment, retained our core development team, and begun reshaping Archer's identity around its original values. It had been just 2 days since Victor had called me lazy garbage in front of the Westridge investors, yet it felt like a lifetime ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Tina. Turn on CNBC. Victor's doing a live interview. I found a television in the adjacent break room and switched it on. Victor's face filled the screen, perfectly groomed and composed as he spoke to the financial news anchor. A temporary setback, Maria. While it's true that I'm no longer with Archer, I'm excited to announce that I've joined Meridian Systems as their new Chief Strategy Officer, leading their expansion into the security market. The anchor nodded. And how will this new venture compare to what you built at Archer Technologies? Victor's practiced smile didn't reach his eyes. What we're developing at Meridian will make Archer's platform look like an outdated prototype. We have the resources, the talent, and most importantly, the visionary leadership to redefine digital security. I watched impassively as Victor continued his self-aggrandizing interview, making promises that would be nearly impossible to fulfill within his claimed timeline. But beneath my calm exterior, a cold realization formed. This was just the beginning of a much larger battle. Victor wasn't just seeking employment elsewhere, He was positioning himself to directly compete with Archer, leveraging his industry reputation and whatever intellectual property he had managed to take with him. The backdoors Ethan had discovered were likely just the tip of the iceberg. As Victor concluded his interview with a thinly veiled warning to Archer's investors about upcoming revelations, I switched off the television, my mind already formulating our response. We would need to accelerate our timeline, strengthen our intellectual property protections, and most critically, prepare for whatever revelations Victor planned to weaponize against us. The morning of change had indeed transformed Archer in fundamental ways. We had secured our funding, begun rebuilding our corporate identity, and taken concrete steps to protect our technology and talent. But as Victor's interview made clear, we had also gained a determined enemy, one who knew our company intimately and was bent on revenge. I returned to my office and opened my laptop. It was going to be another long night, but I was prepared for the challenge. Victor had always underestimated me, had always seen me as merely the competent assistant in his shadow. That misconception had been his downfall once. Now it would be his downfall again. The battle for Archer's future was just beginning, and I had no intention of losing. The media storm hit faster than I had anticipated. By 9 a.m., 2 days after taking control of Archer, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications as tech blogs and business news outlets picked up the story of Victor's sudden removal. The headlines ranged from factual, leadership shakeup at Archer Technologies to the more sensational, coup at tech security firm, director ousts CEO. I sat in what was still settling in as my office, scrolling through the coverage while Tina monitored social media reactions. Most reports had the basic facts correct. Majority shareholder exercises rights to remove CEO. But none had the full story, the history of how my grandfather had founded the company, how Victor had maneuvered him out during his illness, and my years-long strategy to reclaim what had been stolen. CNN Tech wants an interview, Tina reported, looking up from her tablet. So does TechCrunch and the Wall Street Journal. How do you want to handle the press? I considered it carefully. Victor had always courted media attention, positioning himself as a visionary tech leader while I had deliberately maintained a low profile. That dynamic needed to change, but I was wary of letting the narrative focus too much on personal drama rather than Archer's future. Schedule the Journal first, I decided. They're more likely to focus on the business implications, and ask Robert to review our official statement before it goes out. I want to emphasize the board's unanimous decision and our focus on the Westridge investment. Tina nodded and headed out to make the arrangements. Alone again, I turned to the stack of documents requiring immediate attention. Security access protocols to update, signature authorizations for the banks, and most urgently, communication to our key clients reassuring them about continuity. During the transition, a soft knock interrupted my concentration. "Come in," I called, expecting Tina with more media requests. Instead, Diane Williams, our HR director, entered looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We have a situation developing," she said without preamble. "Victor is outside the building with a news crew giving an impromptu press conference. He's making allegations." My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. "What kind of allegations?" "He's claiming you manipulated share purchases through insider information, that you've been sabotaging client relationships to orchestrate his removal, and that the board vote was coerced." She hesitated. "It's getting traction on social media." This was a predictable move from Victor's playbook. When cornered, he always counterattacked with maximum aggression. But I had prepared for this exact scenario. "Is security maintaining the perimeter?" I asked. "Yes, he's not being allowed entry, but the optics aren't great. Cameras are capturing the CEO being locked out of his own company." "Former CEO," I corrected, gently. "Diane, please contact our PR team and have them set up a proper press area in the atrium." We'll address the media directly rather than letting Victor control the narrative. As Diane left to make the arrangements, I called Robert. Victor's outside with cameras, I explained when he answered. He's throwing everything he can at the wall, hoping something sticks. Not surprising, Robert replied, his tone calm. We anticipated this. Have you seen the SEC filing yet? What SEC filing? Victor just filed a complaint alleging securities fraud related to your share acquisitions. It's a desperate move, but we need to respond immediately. I felt a flash of anger, quickly replaced by cold determination. How long will it take you? To get here? I'm already on my way. And Morgan? Bring the Phoenix file. All of it. The Phoenix file was our code for the comprehensive documentation I had maintained of every share purchase, every board meeting, and every questionable decision Victor had made during his tenure as CEO. Years of meticulous record-keeping that would now serve as our shield against his accusations. Within the hour, the atrium of Archer headquarters had been transformed into an impromptu press center. Cameras from major networks and tech outlets were set up facing a small podium, behind which stood a simple backdrop with the Archer logo. No flashy graphics, no elaborate staging, a deliberate contrast to Victor's typically ostentatious media presentations. I stood to the side with Robert, reviewing key talking points while the PR team finished preparations. Through the glass entrance doors, I could see Victor still holding court on the sidewalk, gesturing dramatically for the cameras that remained with him. Remember, Robert advised quietly, stay factual, unemotional, and forward-looking. Don't get drawn into responding directly to his more outlandish claims. That only elevates them. I nodded, taking a deep breath as our PR director signaled we were ready to begin. Walking to the podium with measured steps, I felt the weight of dozens of cameras tracking my movement, capturing this moment for an audience far beyond the journalists gathered before me. Good morning? I began, voice steady. I'm Morgan Reed, acting CEO of Archer Technologies. Thank you for joining us. On short notice, I'd like to address the recent leadership change at Archer and our path forward, then take your questions. For the next 10 minutes, I outlined the facts without emotion or elaboration. My position as majority shareholder through Phoenix Ventures, the board's unanimous vote, our continued commitment to clients and the upcoming security platform, and the Westridge investment that would fuel our next phase of growth. And now, I'll take your questions, I concluded, bracing myself for the inevitable barrage. Ms. Reed, how do you respond to Victor Klein's allegations that you obtained your share position through fraud? Called out a reporter from the front. Bro. Robert stepped forward slightly, but I gave him a subtle signal to let me handle this. Every share purchase was conducted legally, ethically, and in full compliance with SEC regulations, I stated firmly. Our legal team has comprehensive documentation of each transaction, which we've already provided to the relevant authorities. We welcome any review of these purchases and are confident they will be found entirely proper. Another reporter jumped in immediately. Is it true that you orchestrated client defections to undermine Mr. Klein's position? Absolutely not, I replied, maintaining my composure. Archer's relationships with our clients have always been my highest priority. Our client retention rate speaks for itself, and we've already received strong support from key clients regarding the leadership transition. The questions continued, growing increasingly pointed as reporters tried to provoke a more emotional response. But I held firm to our strategy, refusing to be drawn into the personal narrative Victor was trying to create. Eventually, a technology reporter from a respected industry publication raised her hand. Ms. Reed, there are rumors that you're related to Thomas Reed, the original founder of Reed Innovations before it became Archer Technologies. Can you address this connection? The room quieted, sensing we had reached the heart of the matter. Yes, I confirmed, allowing the first hint of personal feeling to enter my voice. Thomas Reed was my grandfather. He founded Reed Innovations, which later became Archer Technologies, based on his pioneering work in network security architecture. Murmurs spread through the assembled press corps as they processed this revelation, quickly connecting dots that transformed the narrative from a simple corporate power struggle to something far more complex. So this wasn't just a business maneuver, the reporter pressed. This was personal. I paused, choosing my next words carefully. My grandfather built this company on principles of innovation, integrity, and respect for both our clients and our employees. Those principles guided my decision to join Archer 7 years ago, and they guide my leadership now. So yes, restoring those founding values is indeed personal to me, just as they should be to any leader who understands that a company's culture determines its long-term success. This response struck the perfect balance, acknowledging the personal connection without feeding into Victor's narrative of emotional vendetta. The mood in the room shifted subtly, with reporters now seeing a different story than the one Victor had tried to sell them outside. As the press conference concluded, Robert leaned in to whisper, "Well handled. You've just changed the conversation completely." He was right. By the time we returned to my office, the first online articles were already appearing with headlines like, "Granddaughter of Archer founder takes helm," and "Reed returns to Reed Innovations, a tech legacy reclaimed." Victor's accusations were still mentioned, but now as a secondary element in a much richer story. The revelation of my connection to Thomas Reed had transformed the narrative, just as we had hoped it would. But Victor wasn't finished fighting. Later that afternoon, as I was meeting with our development team about accelerating the security platform timeline, Tina burst into the conference room, her usual composure visibly shaken. "Victor just called. An emergency investor call," she reported. "He's telling shareholders that the company's intellectual property is compromised and that the Westridge deal is based on fraudulent technology claims." The developers exchanged alarmed glances. Ethan spoke up first. "That's ridiculous. The platform architecture is solid. We've been building and testing it for 3 years." "Victor doesn't care about facts," I replied, already gathering my papers. "He's trying to create enough doubt to tank our stock price and force the board to reconsider his removal." I turned to Tina. "How many shareholders are on the call?" "Our monitoring shows about 60 connections, including several major institutional investors." This was serious. If Victor succeeded in spooking key investors, we could face significant stock volatility and potentially lose the confidence of the Westridge team before their investment was finalized. "Ethan, I need you and the core development team in my office in 5 minutes with all documentation on the platform architecture and testing results," I instructed. "Tina, contact Westridge directly. Tell Sandra what's happening and that I'll be calling her personally within the hour. And someone finds Robert. We need to consider our legal options if Victor is making demonstrably false claims about our technology." As the room emptied, I remained for a moment, processing this latest attack. Victor was growing increasingly desperate, willing to potentially damage the company he had led for years just to maintain his grip on power. It was both predictable and disappointing. In my office, Ethan and 3 senior developers had assembled with tablets and laptops, ready to provide technical validation for our platform. Robert arrived moments later, looking grim. "I'm listening to the investor call," he reported. "Victor is claiming the platform has fundamental flaws that were concealed from Westridge, and that you knew about these issues but deliberately misrepresented the technology's capabilities." Ethan shook his head in disbelief. "That's complete fiction. If anything, we've been conservative in our external claims about the platform's capabilities." "Can we join the call?" I asked Robert. "It's invitation only, and they're screening participants. But we can record it for potential legal action." I considered our options. Trying to force our way onto Victor's call would appear defensive and potentially chaotic. A better approach would be to counter our own investor communication. "Tina, schedule our own investor call for 5 p.m., I decided. "Make it open to all shareholders and analysts. Ethan, Be prepared to give a detailed technical overview of the platform architecture, not just high-level marketing talk, but real engineering specifics that Victor wouldn't understand. The team moved quickly, setting up the call while I prepared my remarks. By 5 p.m., we had over 100 participants connected, significantly more than Victor had managed to attract. "Thank you for joining us on short notice," I began. "I understand there have been questions raised about Archer's security platform technology, and I want to address these directly and transparently." I proceeded to outline the platform's development history, its core innovations, and the rigorous testing it had undergone. Then I handed the floor to Ethan, who provided a level of technical detail that only someone intimately familiar with the platform's architecture could deliver. What Mr. Klein described in his earlier call demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how our adaptive security protocols function, Ethan explained, his expertise evident in every word. The concerns he raised about vulnerability to certain attack vectors were addressed in our architecture over 18 months ago, as documented in our technical specifications. The call continued for nearly an hour, with our team answering increasingly technical questions from investors and analysts. With each response, it became clearer that we possessed a depth of knowledge about the platform that Victor simply didn't have, despite his years of claiming credit for its development. By the time we concluded, the narrative had shifted again. Instead of raising doubts about our technology, Victor's attack had only highlighted his own limited technical understanding and our team's comprehensive expertise. "Check the after-hours trading," Robert suggested once we had disconnected. The stock price, which had dipped following Victor's call, was already recovering. More importantly, several analysts had posted preliminary notes acknowledging the strength of our technical presentation compared to Victor's vague allegations. "We've weathered this round," Robert observed, "but he's going to keep coming. His entire identity is wrapped up in being the face of Archer. He won't surrender that easily." I nodded, already thinking about our next moves. "We need to secure the Westridge deal immediately. With that funding locked in, we'll have more credibility with other investors and clients." "Sandra's office says she can meet first thing tomorrow morning," Tina reported. "Perfect. Ethan, can you prepare a complete technical briefing package for her? Not the marketing materials Victor used, the actual engineering documentation." As the team dispersed to their tasks, I took a moment to absorb what had just transpired. In less than 48 hours, I had gone from being Victor's undervalued operations director to publicly revealing my connection to Archer's founder and defending the company against its former CEO's attacks. The pace was exhausting but exhilarating. For years, I had worked in the shadows, carefully planning each move while Victor took credit for my ideas and dismissed my contributions. Now, I was finally operating in the open, using my voice and knowledge to protect what my grandfather had built. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office after a 16-hour day, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Morgan Reed," I said, expecting perhaps another reporter. Morgan. The voice was instantly recognizable. Harold Winters, the original investor who had helped me acquire my first shares of Archer. "I've been watching the news. You finally did it." "Harold," I replied warmly. "Yes, it's been an eventful few days." He chuckled. "That's putting it mildly. Victor's been calling every investor he knows, spinning quite a tale about you." "I'm not surprised." "How are people responding?" "Mixed," Harold admitted. "Some are concerned about the transition, but others remember your grandfather and are intrigued by the Reed connection. The technical people, especially, seem impressed by your team's presentation today." "That's good to hear. But that's not why I called," Harold continued, his tone growing more serious. "Victor reached out to me directly. He's trying to form a coalition of early investors to challenge your control." My grip tightened on the phone. "Does he have support?" "Some. Not enough yet, but he's persistent." He's focusing on investors who weren't around during your grandfather's time, who only know the Archer that Victor built. Harold paused. He's also making some claims about your grandfather that you should be aware of. What kind of claims? I asked, tension creeping into my voice. He's suggesting Thomas was mentally compromised before the company transfer, that he wasn't capable of making sound business decisions due to his illness and medication. Harold's voice hardened. It's a despicable tactic, but potentially damaging if investors start questioning the original transfer of Reed Innovations to Archer. This was a new low, even for Victor. Attacking me was one thing, but attempting to tarnish my grandfather's memory by suggesting cognitive impairment was truly vicious. I have medical records, I said after a moment. Grandfather's oncologist confirmed his mental acuity throughout treatment, and there were witnesses to all the transactions. Good, Harold replied. You'll need that documentation. Victor's desperate, which makes him dangerous. He's not just fighting for Archer. He's fighting for his entire identity and reputation. After thanking Harold for the warning, I sat in my darkened office, contemplating this latest development. Victor was now attempting to rewrite history, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of his original acquisition of Reed Innovations. It was a risky strategy that could backfire spectacularly, but it demonstrated how far he was willing to go to regain control. I opened my laptop and pulled up a secure folder containing scanned copies of my grandfather's medical records, legal, documents from the original company transfer, and personal journals he had kept during his illness. I had gathered these materials over years, anticipating that someday I might need to defend his legacy. Among the documents was a video recording I had never shared with anyone, my grandfather's personal testimony about the Reed Innovations transfer, recorded 3 weeks before his death at my insistence. In it, he expressed regret about trusting Victor, but was unquestionably lucid and articulate, completely contradicting any claims of mental impairment. I had hoped never to use this recording, to keep my grandfather's private thoughts and regrets confidential. But if Victor forced my hand by attacking Thomas Reed's mental capacity, I would not hesitate to defend his memory. Tomorrow's meeting with Sandra Westridge took on even greater importance in light of Harold's warning. With the Westridge investment secured, we would have additional credibility and resources to counter Victor's increasingly desperate tactics. As I finally left the office, the night security guard nodded respectfully, a small but noticeable change from the days when I had been just another employee. "Good night, Ms. Reed," he said. "And if I may say so, it's good to see Reed back in charge around here." His simple statement reminded me that this battle wasn't just about corporate control or personal vindication. It was about restoring something that had been lost. The values and vision that had made Reed Innovations special before Victor transformed it into a vehicle for his own ambition. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as Victor continued his counterattack. But tonight, for the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt like his legacy was truly in the right hands. The revelation of my connection to Archer's founder hadn't just changed the media narrative, it had altered how the company itself perceived its past and future. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it, the opportunity to rebuild Archer on its original foundation of innovation, integrity, and genuine technical excellence. Victor had spent years erasing my grandfather from Archer's history, but that erasure was now being undone, one revelation at a time. 1 year had passed since that pivotal moment when Victor Klein had called me lazy garbage in front of the eye. Westridge Investors. 1 year since I had revealed my majority ownership and taken control of Archer Technologies. 1 year of transformation, challenges, and ultimately, vindication. I stood at the podium in the grand ballroom of the Seattle Technology Summit, surveying the crowd of industry leaders, investors, and journalists who had gathered for the official launch of our security platform, now branded as Reed Secure in honor of my grandfather. Technology is only as valuable as the trust it creates, I began, my voice carrying confidently through the packed room. At Archer Technologies, we've built Reed Secure not just as a security solution, but as a promise, a commitment to protecting what matters most to our clients and their customers. From my vantage point, I could see Sandra Westridge in the front row, nodding approvingly. Their $85 million investment had already doubled in value as Archer's stock soared, following our successful beta deployments with major financial institutions. Beside her sat Robert Hargrove, who had transitioned from external counsel to Archer's full-time chief legal officer. Ethan, Lisa, and the core development team occupied a table near the center, their expressions reflecting the pride of creators whose work was finally receiving its due recognition. Reed Secure represents a fundamental shift in how we approach digital security, I continued. Rather than building walls that restrict legitimate access, we've created an adaptive system that learns, evolves, and responds to threats while maintaining seamless user experiences. As I guided the audience through the key features of our platform, my mind briefly flashed back to the tumultuous journey that had led to this moment. The weeks following my takeover had been a crucible of challenges as Victor launched a multi-pronged attack against my leadership. His SEC complaint alleging securities fraud had been dismissed after thorough investigation confirmed the legitimacy of my share acquisitions. His attempts to rally investors against me had fizzled once the Westridge deal was finalized, and our quarterly results exceeded projections. Even his desperate move to question my grandfather's mental capacity during the original company transfer had backfired spectacularly when I released the video testimony showing Thomas Reed's clear-minded assessment of Victor's maneuvering. Each attack had only strengthened my position and exposed Victor's true character to those who had previously been charmed by his charismatic facade. By the end of the first quarter under my leadership, Archer's stock had stabilized, employee retention had improved dramatically, and the cloud of uncertainty that had initially surrounded the transition had dissipated. But Victor's most damaging move had come 6 months ago when he joined Meridian Systems, one of our largest competitors, as their chief strategy officer. His first act in the new role had been to announce a competing security platform that bore suspicious similarities to early versions of our own product. The message was clear. He had taken more than just his personal belongings when he left Archer. The legal battle that followed had been intense, but ultimately decisive. Our intellectual property protections proved robust, and Meridian was forced to delay their product launch indefinitely while redesigning core components that too closely resembled our proprietary technology. The setback had cost them millions in development resources and precious market position. Security isn't just about technology, I said, returning my focus to the presentation. It's about people, the people who build the solutions, the people who implement them, and the people who rely on them every day. At Archer, we've rebuilt our company around this human-centered approach to security. I nodded to Ethan, who initiated the live demonstration on the massive screens behind me. The audience watched, clearly impressed, as Reed Secure identified and neutralized a series of sophisticated attack scenarios without disrupting user experience, capabilities that had been theoretical when Victor was in charge, but were now fully realized under our collaborative development model. This adaptive approach is unique to Reed Secure, I emphasized. It represents thousands of hours of innovation by our engineering team, drawing on a security architecture initially conceptualized by Thomas Reed and evolved for today's threat landscape by the brilliant minds you see in this room. The explicit acknowledgement of both my grandfather's foundation and our current team's contributions was deliberate, a stark contrast to how Victor had always positioned himself as the sole genius behind Archer's innovations. As the demonstration concluded to enthusiastic applause, I moved to the announcement I had been most looking forward to making. Innovation of this caliber doesn't come from single individuals working in isolation, I said. It emerges from collaborative environments where every contribution is valued. That's why today, I'm proud to announce that Archer Technologies is implementing a new equity structure that recognizes the contributions of our core innovation team. Murmurs rippled through the audience as I outlined our pioneering approach. 15% of Archer's equity allocated to a developer pool, with distributions based on contributions to our intellectual property. It was a radical departure from industry norms, where technical teams rarely shared meaningfully in the value they created. At Archer, we believe the people who build the technology should share in its success, I concluded, watching the surprised and moved expressions of our development team, because genuine security begins with securing the well-being and recognition of those who make our mission possible. The announcement generated a standing ovation, not just from our own team, but from technical professionals throughout the audience who recognized the transformative potential of this model for the broader industry. As I opened the floor for questions, a movement at the back of the ballroom caught my attention. A latecomer was taking a seat in the last row, attempting to remain inconspicuous, but drawing notice nonetheless. Victor Klein. Our eyes met briefly, across the crowded room. He looked markedly different than when I'd last seen him. His carefully cultivated image of success had faded around the edges. His designer suit appeared slightly too large, as if he had lost weight, and the confident posture that had once seemed so intimidating now read as forced bravado. I maintained my composure, turning my attention to a journalist asking about our growth projections. Throughout the Q&A session, I was acutely aware of Victor's presence, but never acknowledged it directly. He remained for the entire presentation, silently observing from the back row, a stark contrast to the commanding center stage position he had always claimed during his time at Archer. When the formal presentation concluded, attendees moved to the adjacent exhibition hall where interactive demonstrations of Reed Secure had been set up. The room buzzed with excitement as industry leaders tested the platform's capabilities firsthand, with our technical team providing detailed explanations at each station. I moved through the crowd, greeting clients and answering questions, conscious that this launch represented not just a product milestone, but the culmination of our company's transformation. Where Archer had once been known primarily for Victor's outsized personality and promises, it was now recognized for technical excellence and ethical leadership. An hour into the networking session, as I was speaking with the CIO of a major financial institution, I sensed a presence on my shoulder. Turning, I found Victor standing there, his expression unreadable. "Morgan," he said with a nod that seemed almost respectful. "Impressive presentation." The CIO, recognizing Victor, excused himself discreetly, leaving us facing each other in an unexpected moment of privacy amidst the crowded exhibition hall. "Victor," I acknowledged, "I'm surprised to see you here." His mouth quivered in what might have been a smile. "Professional research, know your competition and all that." I studied him, noting the subtle changes in his demeanor. The arrogant certainty that had defined him at Archer had diminished, replaced by something resembling humility, or at least its close cousin, humiliation. "How's Meridian treating you?" I asked, genuinely curious about how he was adapting to not being the one in control. "It's different," he admitted. "The board has very specific ideas about the direction of our security initiative." His emphasis on the board confirmed what industry rumors had suggested. Victor wasn't calling the shots anymore. "I heard your platform launch got pushed back," I said, referencing Meridian's recent announcement that their competing product was delayed indefinitely. Victor's jaw tightened momentarily. "Technical refinements. We want to get it right." Translation. The adapted version being rebuilt after our legal challenge was proving more difficult than anticipated without the original Archer intellectual property. "Well, best of luck with that," I said, preparing to move on to the next conversation. "Wait," Victor said, his voice losing its practiced smoothness. "I wanted to... that is..." He seemed to be struggling with something unfamiliar, perhaps genuine, emotion. "You've done well with Archer, better than I expected." Coming from Victor, This grudging acknowledgement was as close to an apology as I was likely to get. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Though it's not just me. It's the team we've built. The team that always existed at Archer, just waiting for the right leadership." Victor nodded slowly. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. And for once, there was no sarcasm or manipulation in his voice. Just recognition of a truth that had perhaps been there all along, buried beneath his ego. Before I could respond, he continued, "I've been asked to transition out of Meridian at the end of the quarter. The board feels the security initiative needs a different approach." This wasn't entirely surprising after the legal setback, but hearing Victor admit to what amounted to a second firing in as many years was unexpected. "What will you do next?" I asked. He shrugged, a gesture that would have been unthinkable from the old Victor who always projected absolute certainty. "I've had some interest from venture firms in Austin. Might be time for a change of scenery." He glanced around the crowded exhibition hall. Seattle's tech community has a long memory. I could have felt satisfaction at this admission of defeat, but instead, I felt something unexpected, a sense of closure. Victor Klein, the man who had belittled me, stolen my ideas, and erased my grandfather's legacy, was now experiencing the consequences of his actions. Not through any revenge I had orchestrated, but through the natural result of his own choices. "I hope you find what you're looking for in Austin," I said, meaning it. The anger that had driven me for so long had been replaced by something more valuable. The confidence that comes from building something meaningful and sustainable. Victor seemed momentarily taken aback by my sincerity. He nodded, then offered his hand. "Good luck, Morgan. You've earned this." I accepted the handshake briefly, marking the end of a chapter that had consumed 7 years of my life. As Victor walked away, disappearing into the crowd and out of Archer's story, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. "Was that who I think it was?" asked Ethan, appearing at my side with a look of disbelief. "The ghost of Archer passed," I confirmed with a small smile. Apparently being shown the door at Meridian and heading to Austin to reinvent himself. Ethan shook his head. "Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy." His expression turned more serious. "About that equity announcement, were you serious?" "Completely," I assured him. "The paperwork is already finalized. You and the core team will receive your grant letters tomorrow." Ethan shook his head in amazement. "That's not how things usually work in this industry." "Maybe it should be," I replied. My grandfather believed that innovation thrives when people feel valued and secure. That's a principle worth restoring at Archer. As the event continued, I was approached by a young technology reporter carrying a recorder. "Ms. Reed, I was hoping to get your perspective on Archer's transformation over the past year," she began, "particularly how you've managed to accelerate innovation while simultaneously rebuilding company culture." I considered her question carefully. I think the key insight was recognizing that those two goals aren't separate. Technology doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's created by people with specific values and priorities. By returning to the principles my grandfather established when he founded Reed Innovations, we've created an environment where innovation naturally accelerates. "And those principles are?" she prompted. "Integrity in how we build our products, transparency with our clients about what our technology can and cannot do, and most importantly, respect for the people who turn ideas into reality." I smiled. It turns out that when you stop treating brilliant engineers like lazy garbage and start treating them like the valuable collaborators they are, amazing things happen. The reporter's eyes widened slightly at my candid reference to Victor's infamous insult. "Would you say that confrontation with Victor Klein was the catalyst for these changes?" "It was certainly a turning point," I acknowledged. But the foundation had been laid long before that moment, in the quiet work of developers who remained dedicated to quality despite lack of recognition, in the loyalty of clients who believed in our products even when our leadership was flawed. and in the vision of a company that could be defined by innovation rather than ego. Later that evening, after the exhibition hall had emptied and most of the team had departed for a well-earned celebration, I returned briefly to my office. Unlike Victor's former space with its ostentatious decor and imposing furniture, my office was designed for collaboration, with a conference table replacing the massive desk he had used to create distance between himself and others. On that table sat a small wooden box I had discovered in storage during my first week as CEO, a relic from Reed Innovations that had somehow survived Victor's purge of my grandfather's presence. Inside was a handwritten note from my grandfather, dated just weeks before his death. "Morgan, when you build something that matters, build it to last beyond yourself. The true measure of success isn't wealth or recognition, it's creating something that continues to serve its purpose long after you're gone. I hope someday you'll find that kind of purpose. With all my love, Grandpa Tom." I ran my fingers over his familiar handwriting, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. The company he had founded was once again guided by his principles. The technology he had pioneered had evolved into something revolutionary. And I had found my purpose, not in revenge against Victor, but in building something worthy of my grandfather's legacy. From my window, I could see the Seattle skyline illuminated against the evening sky. Somewhere out there, Victor Klein was contemplating his retreat to Austin, leaving behind the wreckage of his reputation and the company he had tried to claim as his own creation. But here at Archer, we were just beginning. Reed Secure's successful launch was only the first step in a journey that would honor the past while creating something entirely new. The company was financially sound, our team was stronger than ever, and our technology had genuinely leapfrogged the competition, including the product Victor had failed to deliver at Meridian. The road from being called lazy garbage to becoming the successful CEO of a thriving company had been longer and more challenging than I could have imagined. There had been moments of doubt, periods of intense pressure, and the constant need to prove myself not just to others, but to myself. But standing in my office, surrounded by the evidence of what we'd built together, I knew that every difficult moment had been worth it, not just for the personal vindication, but for the opportunity to restore something valuable that had nearly been lost, a company built on genuine innovation and mutual respect. I closed the wooden box gently, setting it on the shelf where it would serve as a daily reminder of why we did this work. Then I gathered my things and headed out to join my team's celebration, leaving Victor Klein and the anger he had inspired firmly in the past where they belonged. The man who had once called me lazy garbage was no longer relevant to Archer's story. Our future, bright, innovative, and built on integrity, was the only thing that mattered now. As I stepped into the restaurant where our team had gathered, a spontaneous round of applause erupted. These weren't just employees celebrating a successful product launch. They were partners in a shared vision, each one recognized for their contribution to our collective success. Looking around at their faces, some who had been at Archer since my grandfather's time, others who had joined during our recent transformation, I felt a sense of completion that transcended any notion of revenge or personal triumph. We had rebuilt something valuable together, something that would continue to evolve and grow long after today's celebration ended. The complete victory wasn't just firing Victor from his own company, it was creating something better in its place. A company worthy of my grandfather's legacy and capable of making a genuine difference in the world, and that was just the beginning. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.